Hello out there. Hello in YouTube land, Gnostic land, Moose Lodge land, community land. So, how is everybody doing this Monday evening? I'll have to wait a little bit for people to get here. Hello, Madfinger. Only started the show about 2 minutes late. Had cat. Just as the show was going on, oh, the cats haven't been fed yet. And I like to feed them while it's still light out. That way it's a lot easier for me to find my way to their feeding space. And they needed water. Hello, Meandering Mystic. And I need a little bit of the cigarette I had rolled, but got involved in other things. So, I'm going to go, hello 9E Land, I'm going to go into an interesting place with a, hello Calendal and Ellie. The concept of immunocompetency. By the way, immunocompetency is not a word I made up. And, let me get out of the chat. Immunocompetency is a word from anatomy and physiology. It's a biological term. It's a scientific term. Let me see how my levels are doing here. Hello, hello. Hey, look pretty good. Probably move my mic a little closer to my mouth. Hey, there we go. So yes, immunocompetency is a very real body effect. Hello, I walk. And it's something, you know, so it applies to the body, and I consider the human body to be a template of wisdom for humans, their community, how to interact with each other. Because unlike the world that we see very much at odds and at war with each other, and that's a contrivance, it's not a natural occurrence. When we look in the body, if a body is healthy, there is no war amongst the parts. In a case of an autoimmune disease, we see either war in an aggressive immune system where it attacks the self, or the melees of an immune system that's just so overwhelmed that it's just kind of stopped immuning. And what we're really kind of dealing with at the level of the human animal is the latter, a suppressed immune response. Hello, Soul Traveler. And that's what I'll be getting into when we, over the course of this talk. What was it? What were the other thing? Okay, yeah, and because it's, to me, the immunocompetency is part of Gnosis. Gnosis is an interesting combination of wisdom with the intellect, and of course, and part of the wisdom is the knowledge is experienced. It's not book knowledge. It's not abstract knowledge. It's applicable knowledge. It has real world applications. And then I really want to kind of just address that. I did a stream a couple of months ago called, Be Practical, Get Magical. And I don't think I properly addressed in that particular thing that there's more ill-conceived magical systems currently known about than there are wholesome ones. And so when it comes to being wise and developing immunocompetency, dancing with demons through contrived and non-human magical systems is not good for immunocompetency, because should you make contact with some of the beings that you're invoking, they're going to give you incorrect information. Not all. I mean, they can never give you all incorrect, because their system depends on mimicry and telling us what they've already learned from us, but then throwing in spins, curves, misdirections. And so there are magic, when be practical, get magical. I forgot that much of the magic that is known about on this planet has been given since the subjugation of the planet, and those are the Hermetic systems. The ones that are, and Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. It all evolves from the demiurge. In other words, most of the magical systems that we know about are demiurgic magic systems. They are magic systems to get you in contact with demiurgic critters, also known as archons. And archons are the great pretenders. They will pretend to be everything from ascended masters, and then of course there's the deiforms that come with the Hermetic magic that are tied in with those archontic energies. So they're mythic characters. Remember, myth is the language of the shaman's world. It's not a falsity. There could be falsities in myth, just so there could be falsities in what's called fact. Like our history is not considered a myth, but boy, it's certainly wrong all over the place. And when I did my Mystic Brew timeline one, somebody said it's probably good for a part 2 and a part 3, and there probably will be. I'm not going to label them part 1, part 2. There'll be a continuation of that as a concept. The historical misrepresentation, and a really seriously skewed chronology. Again, I'm not going to use the word timeline, because you can't jump people, this timeline, you can jump timelines. Well, we're not talking about timelines, we're talking about chronology. From our favorite demiurgic being, Kronos. And so anyway, and welcome to, again, there's a lot more content coming online in our community, in the greater community, and in those who partake in the Moose Lodge. So, well, I'm glad it sounds interesting. I walk, as usual, I subscribe to anyone in our community that is putting out material, that are putting out videos, and I watch them, but I'm also seeing how everybody's doing. You're speaking, and so this is an opportunity for people to audit each other. If we're listening to you, and we're listening with intent and desire to understand you, where it's an auditing. Audit to hear, Now, I know in present English, audit means another thing, but again, English is the language of the archons. It's the angle-ish or angel-ish language. And once you really know about the whole mythos regarding angels, hello, Big P99, you're going to want to leave the angels alone. They got nothing for you. We got everything for them. They got nothing for us other than recycled human knowledge that you can learn from another human. You have to find that human, but that's where the angels got it from. And then, of course, they have their own story that they want to tell people about their system that isn't our system. It's a system. I mean, we've been we've walked into it. Well, it's actually been more more like a cage was thrown over us, and then we find out we're in a system. But that cage is thrown over us while our feet are still on Mother Earth. And as long as we have access to her, all we have to do is reopen to her, enter her dreaming, and then all the falsehood is obvious. And that's where part of immunocompetency comes from, is to be able to know the real from the false. You have to know yourself so that you know what other versions of yourself, we are all like a we are all one kind of concept. But even that we are all one is kind of tricky, because who we are, where we align psychologically, where we align in our hearts and our minds, kind of creates artificially created camps. The word artificial is necessary, because it's part of it's part of the virus, actually. And the virus is the religions of the world, and specifically the more dominant ones. It's a virus. And that's one of the reasons why this will definitely tie into the chronology stuff, because I'm starting to become pretty convinced that what we think of as BC or 2,000 years ago actually started about 1,000 years ago. That Christianity is probably no more than 1,000 years old, if not less. Islam is possibly 400 or 500 years old in the new chronology. So that means that the fuckery of the world, in other words, they've been real busy for a relatively short period of time. And so that's one of the reasons also for an extension, to not make it look like, they make it look like this was a really natural progression in the way things unfold, as opposed to, no, this was a contrivance. This was a belief system, a salvationist belief system that would never have taken hold if it wasn't for all the weaponry that accompanied those spreading the word of God. Doesn't matter whether the retaking of Canaan, the pacification of Europe, Muslims running over the same territory that the Christians had smashed the pagans in. Same thing. It's the same stuff, different warlords. But, I mean, the whole spread, all of it was done with the sword. All of this, supposedly the great spiritual center of Western civilization, was all delivered by sword. So there's our great revelations from higher beings. So immunocompetency is the ability to detect frauds and also to know your own. Because the two malfunctions of the immune system are either torpor and non-response to pathogens, and the other one is where you are aware of pathogens, but you can't tell a pathogen from a tribal, from one of your own group. In other words, you can't tell the difference. You know there's something wrong, and you start attacking your own. We see some of that in the political system, especially in America, where it seems there is a virus that is loose in the psyche of America, and the virus aspect of that wants some Americans to attack and not hold dialogue with Americans who have fallen into the other side of a false narrative. And I think much of it has whether on either side, left, right, blue, red, once again, when you're in those boxes, then it just skews the language. And both sides, if people are serious about a country as a place of sovereignty, and I don't mean from government, from the people, then the people have to be able to dialogue. So the people have to dialogue on one concept. So actually, one of the things. I'm not a flag type of person, but flags do represent the colors that supposedly have some qualities of a given sovereign nation. And I know at the moment the United States is not sovereign, but it's not. That's on paperwork. The people are always sovereign. They just have to get it and realize it. Sovereign actually is a combination of two words. Sover kind of comes from the Latin super, or above, and reign, like a king reigns or whatever. So basically it's above reign, above rulership, above kings. That's what sovereignty is. It's above being reign. Hello, Niche. So that's the most important thing to understand about sovereign, above reign. Nobody reigns over a sovereign. So when it comes, I thought it was kind of funny where, you have this divide in America between red and blue. So given the concept of a nation and the colors that it works with, I would urge people in America on political divides identifying as red or blue. How about you drop the red or blue and everybody becomes red, white, and blue? Okay, this is not jingoistic stuff. It's a form of metaphor. But if they're serious about the quality of life in the United States, then you can't be red, you can't be blue. You can only be red, white, and blue. Well, purple would be a blending of two kinds of shit together. So then you would just have purple shit instead of red or blue shit. Yeah, this isn't about mingling of two sorted things. Because in their separation, they become sorted. And I guess because of the whitening effect of white, I guess if you put red and blue together and then you added the white, you might get lilac. I like lilacs. I find there seems to be an affinity with lilacs and Hecate, but that could just be a personal thing. So I'm just want to look. I always have my tempura playing in the background, and I have it just a tad more than usual. I just want to make sure it's not too loud, because I've heard a video or two recently, at least one, where the background music was actually overwhelming the voice. A very recent video that was put out, like one that was put out today. I don't want to mention any names. But that's something to be mind when you're doing, you know, something for mood in the background. It's important that it doesn't overwhelm or compete with the speaker, whether in volume or in a case of like lyrics. If you're speaking and you have lyrics on in the background, they compete. It's like, you know, there's another conversation in your background, even if it's a musical form of conversation, and that competes with the discussion or dialogue that one is having on the mic. Just, you know, thought I would. Hello, Oswald. Thought I might share that with some of the new context creators. I'm glad Moose has his air conditioner. Chances are he's probably resting up and enjoying the sanity that I can bring. I mean, we've had similar temperatures here in Virginia. You know, around 88, you know, mid 80s to upper 80s. But I live at 2,500 feet, and every night, as soon as the sun, I mean, it's already in the lower 70s here, despite being around 86, 87 here today. So that, you know, and I always have my exhaust fan on, and that kind of circulates fresh air. And during the day, when that fresh air is a little on the hot side, I turn on my overhead fan so it creates a direct breeze on me, and I'm fine. But I also, you know, it's fairly open here. It doesn't get oppressive. Humidity doesn't really form the way it does in the lower lands. Like Butch lives, I don't know, maybe anywhere from 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet lower in elevation than I do. And when I go visit him, you know, it takes me about less than an hour to get from here to there. Whenever I get there, not only is it hotter, it's muggier. So I'm really glad. So you know, since Raksha's not here, I'm assuming he's getting some rest, because he did have some really brutal days. SJ. What is SJ, Soul Traveler? Oh, South Jersey. I know South Jersey well. I spent time in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. I was in the middle of the state. I was as far south as Egg Harbor, and Egg Harbor is pretty southern New Jersey. I liked it there. Summers were very hot though, because in the Pine Barrens you don't get a whole lot in the way of breeze. But we had a lake. We lived around a lake, so you got hot, you went in a lake, or at least you went up to your knees and cooled your body off. Yeah, I mean, I actually enjoy my days in the 80s, and I like my nights no cooler than low 70s to mid 70s. It was kind of like that last night, and it was just so glorious. I really enjoy not having to bundle up. Once I can be in short sleeves and minimal clothing, I enjoy that, and I enjoy being able to get through a night with minimal clothing. But that's me, and I'm thin. You know, it's the other thing. As a thin person, I don't have my body heat can escape my body. I don't have a layer of insulation holding in my own metabolic heat. So if you have a little bit of adipose tissue, which acts as a very efficient insulator, it's hard for you to even get rid of your own body heat. So, Egg Harbor is 2 miles away. Yeah. So but I lived, as you might know, the center of the state has a lot of, at least at that time had Wharton State Forest, and they were known as the Pine Barrens. And I really enjoyed being there. I lived in a tent for the whole summer, for 3 summers. Hello, Mari. Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. I mean, when I move to a town, the drinking water is crucial to me because bottled water is not acceptable for me. So I will pick to live somewhere where I don't need to use bottled water. And I also, elevation. I like to be 2,000 feet or higher. One of the things it makes for delightful nights, and on almost, I mean, even when I lived in the Catskills, 100-degree day would have 70, nights in the 70s. So all you had to do was put up with the kind of like the real heat of the day, and as soon as the sun started going down, so did the temperature. And once the sun, once it got night, temperature dropped quickly. So immunocompetency. Now, to me, that's a subject I feel that is almost mine as a mission, as an understanding, a comprehension. The color I associate with is blue-green. There's that whole wizard thing, and in Middle Earth, Radagast was brown. On Gaia, Radagast is blue-green. Blue-green is the color spectrum associated with the thymus gland. The thymus gland is between the heart and the thyroid. The thyroid is right here in that hollow between where your collarbones meet and your sternum comes to the top. Your sternum is that breastbone that your ribs attach to in the front. And we all know we're the heart, pretty much in the center of the chest, and really protected by that sternum. Well, between those, kind of, there's like a point on your sternum where it's kind of like a bump. It kind of comes up, there's a bump, and then it kind of heads a little bit more towards your body. Hello, Christian. And so when we're talking about the color nourishments of the chakras, the heart is green. The thymus is blue. The heart is kind of wisdom. You might think the heart is love. It is, but it's agape. It's that awestruck, swooning, true swooning by the awesomeness of the experience. That's the kind of love of the heart. Then you have, and the heart can feed into Philos a little bit. Eros comes from lower chakras, which is one of the reasons why very passionate relationships can turn quite ugly when they've finished their cycle, because they weren't grounded in agape. They were grounded in Eros. So we have the green of the heart, wisdom. And then we have the thyroid, which is nourished by blue. And the thyroid is also a major cleanser of the body. It's one of the reasons why we need lots of iodine, because the thyroid uses iodine. It kind of stores iodine there as a disinfectant, because I guess every hour 20% of our blood makes its way through the thyroid, and as blood goes through the thyroid, it can be disinfected with the iodine, provided the iodine is there. Lack of iodine can lead to hypothyroidism. Lack of not speaking what's really in your heart, and allowing that to flow into your throat chakra, and to which to speak your true will, your sovereign will, that can also lead to hypothyroidism. I really believe that one of the reasons why there's an epidemic of hypothyroidism, especially amongst women, is, because it also hits men. In the general population, hypothyroidism has a lot to do with a low iodine intake. Women have a double whammy, in my opinion, which is why the diagnosis or diagnoses for hypothyroidism in women is much higher, because besides suffering from the lack of iodine in the diet that most of us do suffer from, they also have at least 1,000 years of being subjugated and made a secondary citizen amongst the human animals. Their opinions are considered less valid, and this has resulted in some serious social programming, and specifically social programming of genders. And so when women kind of adjust their speech patterns to not be called a bitch, aggressive, and all the other things that they don't want to be called, especially because if it's not true, those adjustments to what they say based on what others might think of them is a suppression of the will. That suppression of the will does not, is kind of like a rejection of the blue energy. So the thymus does not get nourished properly from a frequency aspect. So that is my hypothesis of why hypothyroidism is so much higher amongst women than amongst men. Oh, Kalendal, you haven't been persecuted at the hands of women. You've been persecuted at the hands of poor choices. And choosing well can be real tricky these days, especially with the social programming. It's one of the reasons I'm MGTOW. For now, I feel that once Mama's voice is heard by more people, then we start acting in a divine masculine and divine feminine way, and then there can be we can reapproach the subject of how genders interact with each other. Right now, with the state, there's a real strong ally, at least in the courts, for the female gender. Any of the men who've kind of gone to family courts know that there's a bias there. And it's a bias that certainly might seem to like favor women. No, all it has done is created war, great war, amongst the sexes, at least amongst those who can rise above their hormones. So getting back to the thymus and blue-green. So the thymus is this, to me, unique energy blend of the wisdom of the heart and the higher purposeful intent will of the thyroid. There is a lower will based in our third chakra. But when will forms at the third chakra below wisdom, you have wisdom lacking. In other words, your will very often is coming from a more animal nature than our more godlike nature. And the reason why I see even the logic of the blue-green in the thymus, which is where particularly the T cells, and the ones that there are a lot of classes of T cells. The T cells that will come out of the thymus are known as T killer cells. And the reason why the thymus is required for an immunocompetent T killer cell is you better be killing the right organisms. So that's where the green comes in. You have to have the wisdom that feeds the Gnosis of identification. The wisdom of know thyself, know thy environment that you're in. So therefore you can clearly identify threats. Very clear, no question about there's a threat, there's a pathogen that needs to be dealt with. So that's the wisdom part. Then you need the higher will and intent to do something about what you have perceived, to act on Gnosis. And that's where that unique combination is. You have the wisdom and the Gnosis of proper identification, and then you have the intent and will to take that wisdom and find a use for it. In other words, the utility of the application of the wisdom. And to me, that kind of captures the blue, the will, the intent, and the green, the wisdom and agape, and compassion. And of course, the main compassion for any protective agent within an organism is for the organism, not for the pathogens. The compassion is for the health and well-being of the organism, and not for the health and well-being of the pathogen. How do we get to whorehouses? Did I say something that lent to whorehouse discussion? You're getting a little bit beyond the necessary conversation here, Oswald. Yes, it is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. But the thing is, what is the intelligence behind those systems? What is the biological personality, the intelligence that coordinates all that? It isn't our personalities. So I'm trying to get in where the personality can get easy access, and that's the chakras and the understanding of the chakras, and then the application of the wisdom of our bodies to the greater organism, which is our human animal societies. Okay. Good day, Mari. So yes, the sympathetic, parasympathetic. These are really interesting systems. But when I was studying all this in 2008 in massage school, I was listening to this because I love science. I love the data of science. I like the findings, the findings of the raw data. Love it. Hello, Lisa. But then there's the interpretation. So as I was getting all of this, detailed information in anatomy and physiology, I'm listening and taking it in as a mystic. And there were no, I didn't need to adjust the data. The data was fine. It was a matter of placing the data in a proper arrangement. So that the full potentiality of understanding the human animal body could be clear. Kind of listening to Western biology, with the knowledge of both Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine and their systems and the greater whole that they represent. And so the immunocompetency of the human species is what is required to fix this planet. Because the world on this planet represents a huge infection. Huge infection. The millions of dead from wars are is the body count from this infection. So we require the ability to know ourselves, to know ourselves. We would be well served to know where our sovereignty really derives from. What is this planet that we're on? And what were the relationships practiced by most of the planet before the invasion of an alien belief system, which are the dominant religions on the planet, and the body count that came with their arrival. I mean, especially when the three Abrahamic religions of Western society, each one of them has their genesis in a body count. Whether it's Canaan, Europe, and Northern Africa, and then Europe and Northern Africa again by the Islamic latecomers. So to know thyself actually requires to know thy environment. How much a part of that environment is is applicable to you. And basically, when it comes to the natural environment, all of it. Manly P. Hall, who, as everybody, was an honorary 33rd degree Freemason. I don't even think he was ever a regular Freemason. They just, the 33rd degree isn't something they honor you with. To me, it was, if anything, it was the Masons trying to make themselves look good by making him a 33rd degree Mason. And there's a little quote that I found from him just prior to the show. The world has many religions, but nature has but one truth. Nature has but one truth. Mother Nature, Gaia, Sophia, planetary animal mother, plenary sovereign intelligence. So, part of our immunocompetency is knowing what the greater organism we belong to is. But there is a kind of certainly a middle ground, and that would be at least knowing the difference between an uninfected human animal, an infected human animal, and then the psychopaths who are beyond infected. Infections can resolve. Hardwired psychopathic proclivities, that's certainly something that we have to be aware of, because minimally requires certain kinds of at least quarantining. Like I said, minimally quarantining. When it comes to pathogens are going to pathogen. That's what they do. They don't have a secondary pursuit, a secondary career. They are the destroyers of wholesomeness. And because of the way that the city-states have been set up, and governments, which are contrivances on this beautiful planet of ours, archontic contrivances. The concept of, don't forget, archon means ruler. Sovereigns do not have rulers. We have measuring tapes. I walk, you say, it's hard to come to terms with the fact people can be wired, unable to care for another. Necessary, though. Thank you. It is hard, and it's so hard that most of us have abdicated that necessary situational awareness, because it is really unpleasant. And that's, when sometimes people think, oh, where would we, without religions, where would morality be? I don't think anybody needs a religion. I know that nobody needs a religion to know that the human animal is not big on killing other humans. In passion, in rage, and insanity, it could come pretty easy. But, again, when we're kind of like sitting in a group, looking at our issues, and addressing an issue like psychopaths, most people, and then you realize, ooh, man, yeah, we do have that problem. And then some of the, the human mind will immediately start forming some kind of solutions, and you're going to see some of the solutions are really rather unpleasant. Ooh, let's not go there. We have to go there. We have to go there. It's like you're ignoring an infection in your body that your immune system is currently configured is not getting handled. There is an innate ethics in the human animal that comes from our mother, who is not some kind of killer. And neither are our bodies killers, but they know how to do what to do with an infection if they're immunocompetent. And of course, in certain cases where your body's a little overwhelmed, that's why nature has all kinds of things like essential oils and other herbs, mud, whatever. There are all kinds of ways for us to supplement our immune systems. But one cannot mount a proper response without immunocompetency. And that is the wisdom to see pathogens and the effect they're having on health, and the will and intent to do something about it. Now, the biggest thing, the good news, for those who are going, ooh, this sounds a little bit dark. It doesn't have to be so dark. Much of the pathogens are feeding off of us. Most infections cannot really get into a body unless there's enough garbage around, food for them to thrive. Of course, I'm talking about bacteria now and not viruses. Viruses are an idea. Bacteria are the idea, and with some form of body, even if it's a one-cell body, to act on that idea. But bacteria generally are, phages. That means they eat things, and that's why there are countless thousands of bacteria, because there's countless feeding opportunities. And bacteria are ubiquitous. Preferably you don't live in a sterile environment. You're taking all kinds of bacteria in, and if you need them, you have access to them. But at the same time, there are certain bacteria that can only exist in your body if there's some garbage to feed them. So the biggest, and I don't know if it's the easiest, but certainly the most palatable for most people, part of immunocompetency is the ability to not nourish, to keep your psychic space, to do the community, to do the kind of personal hygiene that endless moose lodges have been about, so that when these thought forms come in, hello, Joe from the Carolinas, when these thought forms come in, and especially in the form of bacteria, there's no garbage laying about for them to feed on. And so they just come in the body, nothing here, and out one of the tubes. No T killer cells were involved in that handling of a potential pathogen. Again, there was no terrain for the pathogen, so the pathogen passes through. Pathogen can't make more of itself unless it has the food that particular kind of pathogen desires. Hello, Deborah. Well, bacteria live the good. Again, what we call good and bad bacteria is just a matter of where they are. There are bacteria that we are symbiotic with, and then there are bacteria that we might call pathogenic, like certain E. coli. But there's a whole host of pathogenic bacteria that you want. If you have a cesspool, you want those bacteria in your cesspool. You just don't want them in your bloodstream. So even good or bad bacteria have to be seen with them. If they get introduced into your body, then there's something wrong. But bacteria are the great symbionts of this planet. So the antagonistic really does, to me, requires some wisdom. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if another live stream. Usually I'm getting into the 20s. I'm into the single digits, and I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, so apparently I checked out for a while. All right. I saw that thing. I wasn't sure how long I was watching. Gee, I wonder if that buffering is what led. I mean, suddenly, yeah, here we go. People are coming back. Wow. Okay. Yeah, Deborah said something very good. All symptoms of disease are symptoms of healing, and I agree with that. Or certainly the engines of healing. Like in other words, when the Lyme disease spirochete first activated in my system, it created super high fevers. How high? I don't know. I didn't, but high enough to knock me unconscious, to put me into a fevered delirium. Now, of course, delirium is kind of a medical term. And the medical field does not understand shamanic journeying and shamanic learning. So when those fevers hit me and I was knocked unconscious, just from the high fever, I went on shamanic journeys, and I was learning a lot. I was a body worker, so much of my instruction was about the body, how it works, how it interfaces with both the greater or higher self, and how it interfaces with the personality. The personality structure, or the ego structure, in very many cases, is the worst challenge that the biological personality, the biological body, the body that heals itself, the personality can be the biggest challenge. So when I got my fever, and I don't recommend other people doing this because it really requires that you the amount of absolute trust that your body can handle this. And the other thing is that if you happen to die in the process, that's okay too. So again, what I'm talking about is what I did, and I don't recommend it, because I got to tell you, all you have to do is put a little bit of fear, a little bit of doubt into this finely tuned system, and you will fuck it up royally and could really hurt yourself. So when these fevers came, I succumbed to them because, first of all, I was having wonderful shamanic experiences, and also I knew that as long as my personality stayed out of the body's way, when the temperatures got to the point of doing organ damage, the organs would give a shout out. They would release something into the body, and the fever would break immediately. So what I was going through was I would go through that kind of pre-high fever, some chills when the fever's like around 102 and you get chills. And then as the fever rose, I would start to get hot and sweat, and then I would pass out. And then when I was in that unconscious phase and the body was cooking out the spirochetes, when that temperature got too high and there could be damage to my organs, the fever instantly broke. And then I would wake up from that broken fever and have a little bit of kind of a little like rest in my body. And that would last, that kind of cooling off period might last about an hour. And then the chills would begin again. And that was the heating up period. But again, you know, you get up to about 102, 103, you have chills, but, you know, you're hardly in the delirium. And it's when it spikes, I don't know, probably to at least 104, 105 and higher. That's when you pass out in delirium. And that's when the pathogen killing begins. And again, I had surrendered completely to the process. I surrendered to the process that my body knew what to do. I also surrendered to the process that if this killed me, that was also fine. That worked. I didn't have an issue with that, other than I was at Omega in my tent, and I was a little concerned about whether or not it wouldn't be kind of bad manners to leave a dead body, and, you know, the whole, you know, somebody died at Omega, you know, type of thing. But I had a pretty good insight that I wasn't going anywhere. And I've said a few times, Death and I have a conversation every day, and we both agree we're not even near that time. See, that's where you put an interesting thing in there, Deborah, about whether it's too high. With children, you know, we got to do another thing. I was making a sovereign decision above one of my own body. But the concept that there could be too high a fever, if you have that, then you never want to do that real method, because then you're monitoring it. There's not, you know, once again, we either trust the process and we don't do any monitoring except our own personal monitoring, or we don't trust the process, in which case we have a thermometer and we're monitoring whether or not the fever's too high. And that's why I say what I went through, I recommend nobody else attempt. Because one seed, don't forget, you know, the size of a mustard seed. All you need is that little bit of doubt in what you're doing. And it's amazing how one piece of data, oh, it's 107. Once again, I mean, I couldn't really monitor my temperature when I passed out because I was unconscious. But, you know, again, you say we trust in our bodies or we don't. But the thing is, we might say that we trust in our body, and then we realize that we still are playing with some medical concepts that run counter to that trust. And that makes a perfect metaphor for even my own experience of entering Sophia's dreaming. It wasn't until I completely dumped the demiurge and all connections with that being that I could really be in the dreaming and really be in the connection that goes with that, and really partake of the sovereignty of the earth, because the other system does not make us sovereign. It makes us subjects. Which is one of the reasons why I brought up about Western concepts, systems of magic, especially Kabbalistic systems. But the Hermetic systems are really not much cleaner. Alchemy is clean. Alchemy is a language. Alchemy is an understanding of connections. Alchemy is the language used in magical systems, both wholesome and demiurgic. But I will say that most of the magical systems are part of the system. The only system that we belong in is the ecosystem. That's our system. All other systems are fictions for the human animal. Now, we can create organisms if the human animals themselves are creating those organisms. We have the power of creation. But when you have things putting together systems, they're not part of the ecosystem. So we kind of come back to immunocompetency, and that's why I said immunocompetency and Gnosis. Because part of the immunocompetency, part of the ability to know how to protect yourself, your family, your community, and the planet at large requires Gnosis, requires wisdom. Gnosis is based in wisdom. And wisdom dictates that you only know what you've experienced. Hope I don't buffer again. I see I'm getting a reading of bad video settings, but I seem to be holding on here. And a big part of wisdom and Gnosis, especially on an imprisoned planet. I won't call this a prison planet because that would diss the planet. But currently, many prisons on the planet, and most of them are psychological. You couldn't fit the population in the world into prisons, so you have to build psychologically constructed prisons if you're going to contain the masses. Which is one of the reasons why I have videos. Like, in other words, if I'm doing Mystic Brew and I'm discussing chronology, I have a 40-minute video to get people clued in. I mean, it's almost like, you know, when you have lessons in school, usually to discuss whatever the topic of that day is going to be, there's reading the night before, so that when we go into new material, you have a background. You have kind of gone through this, and now we're going to go in through it deeper. So with regards to Can't You Hear Me, Gnostic, I have the 2 interviews with Lisa Harrison, so that you can know the master narrative, so you can understand the Sophianic narrative. When it comes to the chronology, I have that other one, because to discuss things without to people who are not a little bit grounded in the conversation is almost unfair, which is one of the reasons why I post those things. But just like when I was in school, I did the reading so that I could perform well in class the next day, so I could be present and actually hold my own with the information being presented. Without that preparation, you know, it's a little bit of a participation trophy thing. Okay, Calendar, be well. So, immunocompetency and the ability to correctly assess our environment is much needed. And I think there's considerable progression, wonderful progression in our community and in the world at large. I see a lot of things on minds.com that are really getting what sovereign means. As a matter of fact, I got that breakdown of the word sovereign on minds.com. And I liked it because it was a breakdown into words. My own experience when I, especially, I mean, I always have a sense of sovereignty, but when I enter into Sophia's dreaming, the sovereignty is like the primary feeling tone. That sense of, this is my planet and I am as regal as any king or queen ever was, and I share in this with all my fellow human animals. We are the regents of this planet. And you won't get that sense of sovereignty from any other mythos, because they don't give it. They can't give it because they're part of a system where a true understanding of your sovereignty is the worst thing that could happen to their mind control. Now, I did tune up my acoustic guitar tonight because I might do the Goob song, also known as Go to Your Room. We'll see. First time I did it, I did it on a Mystic View, I think, some months ago. Definitely some months ago, because I remember the lunar cycle that, the lunar cycles that have passed since I wrote it. And I feel during this lunar cycle with Indris, oh yeah, to 432 hertz for sure, Oswald. During this time of the twins and communication and proper use of the tongue, that it might be time for me to do kind of like a fairly, should be fairly polished. I did it again with Uncle Butchie on Friday. Actually, last night I spent some considerable time singing it while playing the bass, because that's what I do in Uncle Butchie. I want to read what's going on before it passes. And and then I really want to do, I'll do it live here, then I want to do an isolated video, will probably be me and acoustic guitar, and ultimately I'd like to do, a version on Reaper's DAW, that's digital something, I forget what the digital, what's my recording software, my digital recording software, can't forget, I can't believe I forgot the words, to the acronym DAW. And I'd like to do that, kind of, and then, but ultimately I want to get the Uncle Butchie version, because one of the things I'm going to do with Uncle Butchie, because I have the brilliant soloist and, lead instrument of Butch's banjo, I'm going to kind of give him a solo in the song, and the solo will not be in my versions, but it'll be in those versions. And the addition of the solo means I would be doing the bridge in that version of the song twice. If I do it tonight, then I only do the bridge once, because it becomes a different song with the solo, because the solo takes up what would be a fourth verse, and there's 3 verses in the song. I was very happy to, I'm loving all the artwork that's coming out. And I'm really glad everybody has started, that there are more and more YouTube channels like Sarath the Mage, Meandering Mystic. Kalendal seems to have been a little quiet lately. Al Walk is putting, put out that wonderful video he did of that Ode to Others. I know it's not the full title. I Walk can put it in the full title. If you haven't listened to that piece of music, please do. It's very moving. It really kind of captures an energy of these times. And he kind of wrote it with the community in mind. Well, I will be then. Okay, I will be doing my "Go to Your Room" song. It's kind of. Let me get into my camera so I see what I'm doing. It's kind of tricky. I have the 3 verses on one piece of paper, and I have the bridge on the backside. But I'm pretty sure that I have the bridge memorized. Yeah, I'll read the words first. And there's still maybe a few adjustments to words, the pronouns and things like that. But okay, Go to Your Room, the Goob song. This song is for the goobs who run gooberments and act like royalty. Your strut hints at a limp, and I think you've had a glimpse of your destiny. We have seen your work for thousands of years. Earth doesn't like you, and it's pretty clear. You need to leave the stage now. We've had quite enough. So go to your room. You've been on quite a tear now. You've had your chance and failed miserably. Now this is from a human who knows that you're not and what you believe. Though not everyone yet sees through your ruse, when they find out, they'll be thinking noose. So do yourself a favor before it's too late and go to your room. Then I would usually go to the bridge. It says, look at the goobs in power. I think they're running scared. Too many people have come to be aware. The gig is up. Your bloodlines suck. They've gone to hell. So why don't you go there as well? Now I am not a sadist and don't want revenge, but you have to leave. Now some won't see it that way, and they'll want you to pay a dire penalty. Are gibbets and gallows just our fantasy? Stay in the game, stick around and see. Your history is over. We break your pen. Now go to your room. So what, the song is really kind of written in a bardic, mocking style, mocking those who believe that they are something special. Go to your room. That's kind of how you would speak to naughty children. So to speak to the rulers of the world like they're naughty children, that'll make them fucking crazy. And that's what it is. It's dismissing them for the errant beings that they are. And we, the sovereigns, are telling them they're quarantined. Go to your room. So, and then of course, you'll hear it. It's kind of sung upbeat. And why shouldn't it be upbeat? The sovereigns are singing it. It should be upbeat. We're not the ones being sent to our rooms. We're the ones instructing the few, the troublesome few, to go to their rooms. Their history is over. We break their pen. Their spell writing. Now go to your room. Now, if I was really hip, I would take, I mean, here's something, I'm going to try and put the tempora in the key that I'm playing in, because it has that. Gonna need my glasses, and I might need a flashlight. Oh, it is in C. Excellent. When I first, I must still be in C from when I did it the last time. I was doing it in D. I had the tempora in D for most of the early ones, but then when I realized I was going to be doing this one time, I guess I did put it to C, and it has stayed in C. So, they should be in tune. Oh yeah. I don't know if you can hear that there's the background. They are in tune. And fortunately the tempora has a pitch adjustment, so the tempora is also in 432. Oh, I should probably use a pick. So I'll take it from my Telecaster. Okay, now this, I don't know how well it's going to pick up the guitar. I wanted to, let me give you some feedback on if the guitar sounds decent. Does the guitar come through? Because my voice, I mean, this is a very directional mic, so my voice is directed at it. Sounds good? Sounds excellent. Very, very good. Okay, so I'm going to move the mic away a little bit because I tend to sing a little louder than I speak. This song is for the goobs who run gooberments and act like royalty. Your strut hints at a limp, and I think you've had a glimpse of your destiny. We have seen your work for thousands of years. Earth doesn't like you, and it's pretty clear. You need to leave the stage now. We've had quite enough. So go to your room. You have been on quite a tear now, and you've had your chance and failed miserably. Now this is from a human that knows that you're not and what you believe. Though not everyone yet sees through your ruse, when they find out they'll be thinking noose. So do yourself a favor before it's too late and go to your room. Yeah, look, the goobs in power, I think they're running scared. Too many people have come to be aware. Ease up, your bloodline's stuck, they're gone to hell. So why don't you go there as well? I'm a sadist, I don't want revenge, but you have to leave. Now some won't see it that way, want you to pay a dire penalty, or give bids and gallows, just a fantasy. Stay in the game, stay Your history is over and we break your pen. Now go to your room. I'm telling you now, go to your room. I'm not waiting. Now go to your room. Well, I almost did that with no mistakes. Almost. Getting cleaner and cleaner. So, that's Go to Your Room, the Goob song. Who are the Goobs? They're the ones behind Goobermints. They're not the ones whose names we necessarily know. They're the ones who give instructions to the ones that we know. And that was an old Washburn Dreadnought guitar that they don't make anymore. So anybody, what kind of guitar is that? It was a Washburn. And I use 11 gauge strings, Diodario, on the guitar, and I use an unwound G. One of the reasons there are 11s with wound Gs, but the less wound strings, the less squeak. Hello, Raksha. Zach, I can't answer a question that I don't know what it's asking me. I don't know what Wellnitz or Pipkern is. So anyway, if we can find a common language to communicate in, I can consider answering it. It's also one of the reasons I love my new nylon strings on my bass, because there's no squeak. This is nice and slippery and nice rich tone. So am I kind of language deprived, or are there other people who don't know what Wellnitz or Pipkern means? Hello, Sandy. Hey, Joe, can you imagine doing that with a more driving kind of punk fashion? There's actually, it's funny, your band had an effect on a song I wrote. I have a song. No, I don't know Home Depot. Any of that stuff. Anyway, nor do I would understand how anything from Home Depot would fit into this conversation. Oh, yeah, Joe. There's a song I do. It's actually, the basic, and it's meant to be kind of a little like a me. It's funny, I don't finger pick for a couple of weeks and I lose it. But anyway, it's a finger picking song. So I plugged it in. I have a TC Electronics dark matter distortion, and I said, gee, if I ever went down into Joe's neck of the woods and I wanted to do a song of mine, and I thought about the song, and then I tried it with fuzz and like the same rhythm. Same tempo, but with a drive, and it worked. So it was really cool. It was kind of, I have a song I can do in two different ways, and the inspiration for the other way was me buying a really nice warm distortion pedal and seeing your band play, Joe. I hope you're still here. And this distortion pedal has such a nice, rich, warm tone that when you kind of do the drone chords, it really works. No, I was not in the early punk scene. I guess I was involved as a in the audience, although I was playing punk. I was too accomplished a musician for punk. Um, I mean, when you grow up playing stuff like Cream and other kind of styles that are at least approaching some form of virtuosity. Punk doesn't quite work there. But that's just because I didn't play punk is doesn't mean that I thought punk was bad. Again, it was just like they came up. I guess some of them had been playing guitar for a year or two, and that's what they put together. Hey, that's art. So how was I involved? Let's see. Well, the Ramones, when I was living in the Bronx, one of the bigger kind of, I mean, it was CBGB's, but CBGB's was a dump, and I played there with one of my bands. Matter of fact, the only time I was ever in CBGB's was when I played. Max's Kansas City, I would go because it was a cool place to hang out, and I played with a band there also. But I had gone to Max's Kansas City because the Ramones had just been signed. See, the Ramones have been playing around New York and had gathered quite a following before they got their first record deal. So they were the opening act at Max's Kansas City, and fresh off their signing. I mean, the ink had barely dried, and they were doing this gig. I forget who, it was kind of typical, like the Fillmore East kind of set a template for what a proper night of music was, and that was 3 bands. You had an opening band, you had an up-and-coming band, and then you had the headline band. And yeah, CBGB's was a dump. Yeah, it smelled a lot like piss. Although I did get a Hummer there, but what the heck. Anyway. Yeah, I guess there was a smell of piss even with that. But Max's Kansas City. So the headlining band was Ramones, freshly signed. I forget who, the opening band, 3 bands. The middle band, the up-and-coming band that wasn't signed yet, was Blondie. Oh, Bad Brains. I know 2 of the guys from Bad Brains. Yeah, they were really good musicians. They lived in Woodstock, 2 of the guys. And one of them worked at one of the places I bought, one of the farmers markets. It was a regular place that sold produce, but he worked there regularly. The lead guitar player, I forget his name. And I guess Daryl was the bass player. I knew Daryl. But yeah, so I mean, the punk scene, I was there for the Ramones' very first signed performance, and Blondie was the second act, not signed. I mean, at 65 years of age, I kind of, was alive. I mean, I was 12 or 11. 12 when I picked up the guitar. So I was kind of like 11 going on 12 when the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, and all of that was hitting America. It was the Beatles and the Stones, to an extent, that made me pick up the guitar. That's what got me into music, was the English Invasion. I remember it was either late '69, I think, when it was the summer of '69. I remember I had dropped some acid, and it was a hot, kind of muggy night, and I wasn't doing well, and I was hanging out with my friends at the gas station. So the guy, the boss's son, who was the manager, he said, "Hey, I got air conditioning in my car. Go sit in the car, cool off a little bit, and just listen to the music." And he had Led Zeppelin 1. That was like, I had heard some of the songs, but this is like, here I was on acid, and it was on an 8-track. And I listened to all of Led Zeppelin 1, and that kind of got me into some good places. So when I first was listening to Led Zeppelin, there was only one Led Zeppelin album. And then I might have told the story before, when the second album came out, we went to a friend's house of mine who had a really good stereo. We gathered in her bedroom. It was a nice-sized bedroom, rug on the floor. Passed some bowls and some joints around, and then put on the album. Fresh vinyl, never been played. And of course, song 1. How did we start that, almost an hour journey? with Whole Lot of Love. And, you know, here we are in this, I mean, and then, you know, that middle part and Whole Lot of Love, when they come back into the song and they go, dun, dun, you know, and Jimmy plays his leads. You know, here it is, you know, in this room, and, you know, not a huge room with really great speakers. And when you get to that part, dum, dum, dun, 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 dum, dum, it was like, just an unbelievable experience. Similarly, I'd heard a song on the radio, and I didn't know who it was. Apparently, it was a Uriah Heep song. But I described it as being kind of witchy. I don't even remember what the Uriah Heep song name was. But they sold me an album by this band that only had one album out at the time. The name of the album and the name of the band were the same. It was Black Sabbath. And I got tuned into Jethro Tull just as their second album, Stand Up. The first one was This Was, I think, and then there was Stand Up. And when you opened the album cover, the band stood up. It was kind of like one of those, you open it up and there was a 3D thing there. So when I went to see Black Sabbath, I don't remember the year, and I don't really care. It had to be around 1969, 1970. The headlining act was Rod Stewart and the Small Faces, a band I never had any intention to go see. Not that I thought they were terrible, they just weren't really my kind of music. And you know, Ronnie Wood had just come off the bass, and the Jeff Beck band was now in lead guitar player. It was hardly anybody's favorite lead guitar player, let me tell you that much. But so anyway, so when I went to see Black Sabbath, they were like the equivalent of Blondie, except they did have, you know, they did have a record contract, but that was it. They had one album. I think they were playing Paranoid on their first tour. That was the only other song that wasn't on their first album that they were performing on their first tour. Paranoid would be on their second album. And as far as I'm concerned, their second album was when Black Sabbath started going downhill. The very first Black Sabbath album is probably one of their best album. A friend of mine actually has a demo tape, a Black Sabbath demo tape when they were looking for record contracts. And there was about 8 songs. Let me tell you, they played almost they had some of the heavy sound that you would later hear. They had some jazzy, they did some blues. They even had like kind of a pop song in there. Black Sabbath was some really good musicians. The drummer was excellent. Tony Iommi was going to be in Jethro Tull when he had his accident. He was going to be Martin Barr of Jethro Tull. So he ended up starting his own, and Geezer Butler is a very solid bass player. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the whole, you know, where we are in music, I mean, before the English invasion, yeah, there was Elvis Presley, there was the doo-wop and stuff, but, you know, we were listening to novelty songs. Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini, One-Eyed, One-Horned, Flying Purple, People Eater, the Battle of New Orleans. I'm talking about, like, novelty stuff. Mixed in with a little Elvis and, obviously, you know, the black musician music, Coasters, you know, all that great music. So I kind of, you know, I've been around since this whole rock and roll thing got started in earnest. Like I said, you know, Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley are kind of like from an earlier era, and they made, you know, the guy wrote Rock Around the Clock. And so it's been really interesting to see the progression of music. Actually, I wouldn't call it a progression. It's almost like society. There's been a devolution. Yeah, actually, the person who was most into magic, I'm not going to call it the occult, because the occult has a whole, I mean, occult means hidden. And much of what became occulted when the religions came around was the you know, the pagan earth religion that had to be hidden, so it became occulted. So occult has this mystery, and it should have, because it's our story. And again, our story and my story go together. But the occult stuff is actually our mysteries, the true stuff that had to be hidden so that one could stay alive. So a lot of the there's and also modern production techniques. I mean, look, some of the early stuff is really rough, and then there was some good stuff, and now it all sounds like it comes out of a tube. Modern producers have become there's no originality. Back in the day, kind of like each producer had their a unique sound. Phil Spector had the wall of sound, multiple tracks, creating this, kind of, edge of the world kind of sound. Was a great sound. You use it with the Ronettes and a bunch, a lot of other people. But now, and you used to rehearse your songs really well and then go into the studio and try and get a good take. A lot of the music today isn't based on takes. People add their parts and then they go, hey, you screwed up that part, but I'll just take it from verse 1 where you played it well and put it into verse 2. So you don't really have that natural flow in production anymore. Production is, it's very much on the grid, exact timing, as opposed to the timing of having a tempo but playing around with the tempo. Everything is so sterile. And I don't like the sound. I really don't like the sound. Everything sounds like it was, mixed to be a TV commercial. I don't think, punk, punk is dead as the kind of like the trend. Punk will never die, and I think that's a good thing. What the markets do, what the goobs do, is they always, try to catch what's hot. And nothing can stay hot, in the marketing scheme, especially since a lot of it's contrived, will stay hot for, forever. So then you have to come up with the new trend. And then to me, what happens is after things are no longer trendy, they kind of settle back into the greater musical melting pot and become an influence. So I think the impact that punk made on music in general will never die. It left its mark, and I don't think that's a bad thing. There is something endearing about people beginning their walk in the world of artistry, and then even before they're capable of being Picassos, they're still putting up what they can and putting art out there. There's some of that, and then of course, look, there's also the weaponization of art, and so there is, to me, there is parts of punk that were weaponized, but so was rock and roll. Anything that's popular, anything that a lot of people are consuming, the goobs will find some way to insert some poison. Again, when you have something really good, there's no safer medium to put something a little bit funky into something other than something that's really rich and has so much of its own content that when you start adding in those other ingredients, they're not picked up on so easily. Okay, so, once again, Joe from the Carolinas has a punk band. I would love to go see them. I'm glad that they put some music out. It's, and it's actually not a bad time. To me, it's a relatively good time for that defiant attitude. But I like when the defiance is genuine and not a show. So, like, in many ways, the Goob song, Go to Your Room, that's a defiant song. It's not. It's kind of done in a almost a Dixieland jazz kind of upbeat thing, but the message is highly defiant. You know, one of the plebes telling the self-anointed, go to your room. Who do I think I am? I think I'm a luminous child. I think I'm one of Gaia's sovereigns, is who I think I am. And this is from a human who knows that they're not and what they believe. And that's why it's kind of sung in the way, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's sung lighthearted, because the sovereigns can be lighthearted about the state of their planet. They can just be lighthearted and say what they need to say. They don't have to put on war paint and make a menacing song to speak the truth, which is the most menacing to the goobs. The truth of who we are on this planet. The truth of the anthropos, the truth of Gaia Sophia. Those are the things that scare them shitless, because those are the things that make us sovereign and make them either equals or identified pathogens. Yes, Zach, the rest are only apps. And I even think about, you know, when I'm listening to things about going to, you know, to the fourth and fifth dimension. You know, when are we going to get out of 3D? I think it's interesting how much of the movement, much of the information about getting out of 3D happens looking on 2D screens. Think of that. Smartphones and our computers, everything is in 2D. Let's let that sink in for a bit. Our sovereignty is in 3D and greater. And it's, to me, there's nothing wrong with using 2D technology, because this allows us to communicate over long distances. It works. But how many people are getting sucked in to the 2D world? You know, which bands are, it's not even important which bands are suspected, because there's no fruit in identifying people who aren't active right now. You know, let's take somebody who has a little bit of a sordid reputation, at least amongst certain people, and that would be George Soros. Now, there's a lot of InfoWars is a big one on talking about George Soros and his Nazi collaboration. All I can say is, if he did collaborate, and so in his own words, supposedly in a 60 minutes interview, he kind of says that, yeah, he didn't feel bad about it. I got to get out of my screen. Okay, here I am, safe from extras. Where was I? It'll come back to me. At some point. Okay, AJ, thank you. That helped me. No, so with George Soros, at least according to his biography, was born in 1930. Things were starting to get pretty jiggy in Germany around 1939. And that would have made George 9 years of age. If we take it like into the middle of the war period, let's say 1943, that would make George Soros 13 years of age. Now I remember who I was at 13 years of age, and fortunately I was not on my own. But I was fairly precocious and, had a certain amount of business sense by 13. So if you have a 13-year-old who suddenly doesn't have their parents and they're on their own and they have, and they are just like, what works for me, I can foresee that. But here's where I'm going to get about where I got off on this with rock bands. Who were the dirty rock bands? To me, when it comes to dealing with people or anybody, it's like, in other words, the book of George Soros will not be complete until he leaves the planet, until he dies. And then that book, there's no more to write on that book. I mean, you can have, post-mortem, but, as far as the living George Soros, there's a book being written. And so the World War II is in some of the earlier chapters. I mean, the man was at the end of World War II was 15 years of age. Was he in his 70s or 80s now? I guess I could do the math. 1930, so he was 70, so he's, 88 in 1918? Yeah. So, yeah, pretty old guy there. And so for me, what I'm looking at is not the early chapters of the book on George Soros. There's a chapter that's being written right now. And there's a couple of chapters like say from last year. So to me, if I'm going to focus on somebody who I think might not be doing nice things, good things, I have that historical context. But the most important thing for me is what are they doing right now? So similarly, like, if the Beatles did get some nasty stuff in their influence, they haven't been a band for how many years now? So to me, that's like, that's too much going back up our own butts to, check about meals we had 20 years ago. And to me, that's where we stay focused, and that's where we stay. The PowerPoint is in the now. So if we're going to do anything, it's in the now. I mean, there's certain little magical things of casting things in the future, so you meet them in the now, but now becomes the operative point of power. So when it comes, whether it was the Grateful Dead, Beatles, whatever, I mean, again, those books are written. So to me, there's not much to go there. Where there's people like George Soros who are still entries to their latest chapter. So to me, that's where we focus. We focus on the now. So whatever fuckery might have entered modern music, it's kind of been done. And I don't know that a retrospect would bear much in the way of fruit. Okay, let me get back into the chat. We're coming towards the end here. Okay, so we're coming right up on close to 2 hours. So I'm just gonna I feel like I've done my immunocompetency and associated topics that arose. And so Yeah, thank you, Nisha. I didn't want to speak over you, but when he said, when I heard, so that's horrendous, I go, well, it depends on the situation. Doesn't have to be. I mean, we have people in every community still talking about how much their parents fucked them up, especially during their formative years of puberty. So to assume that because somebody, grew from, an age of puberty without parents, that can be a blessing. Doesn't, it could be a harsh or it could be a blessing. I mean, there's a lot of damaged people running around because they had the advantage of being with parents during their formative years, and their parents fucked up. Some of them fucked up big time. And some of the ways parents fuck up is, they probably shouldn't have had kids in the first place. They didn't get along well enough to stay together. What are you bringing kids into the fold for? I mean, again, it can all turn out well. It can. And the more sovereignty we have, usually the better it will turn out, because it's from that understanding, that sitting in your sovereignty, that you make good sovereign decisions. And one of the things that many parents do until late into their offspring's age, sometimes into their 20s, is not allowing them sovereignty. I understand it at the younger ages, but even then, you want to be careful with how much you squish the regal nature of your children, that inherent that knowing who they were. That they start out with. And that parents who have bought into not being sovereigns, then having that conversation over these precious children's heads and into their ears, and socially programming them, the social linguistic programming of the conversations. So Oswald, you've been real good. Your questions have kind of like come in a gentle flow. So I just want to acknowledge you around that one. Because a lot of times at the end when I go, okay, anybody got any questions that are on anything, a lot of the questions arise in the moment. That's one of the reasons why I usually will keep a pad by me, so I can jot down things, especially when we get together a few people and we're doing kind of a talking stick type of thing. A lot of times while somebody has a talking stick, you will get like a huge download. And so sometimes you want to say, oh, I have to speak right away, but you can write it down and you can still get it, but you better write quickly. Owls are a totem of mine, Oswald. Just like the bat. Kind of like the two totems that will never be shifting are bat and owl. Like myself, they are creatures of the night. I am a nocturnal creature. Like Hecate, who worked every night and slept in the cave during the day. The owl sees through deception. It can fly silently. The bat, especially the ones who live in caves, each, between like hanging upside down as we do in our mother's womb, and then emerging from a cave, being born anew each night, shamanic death and rebirth. I'm a little interested, Iwalk, you saying your birth animal is the vampire bat. Vampire bat is, amongst the bat species, is a relatively small representation. And I can see somebody having bat as a totem, but I don't understand how you got vampire bat. Matter of fact, the vampire bat was pretty much, I guess, a part of Central America, Mexico. It was Hollywood that made the vampire bat famous. Do I have to say more? Once the word Hollywood enters as a source of something, please know how contaminated that source is. It's not that there aren't vampire bats, but they kind of made bat into a vampire bat. I mean, I like the little guys. I had to rescue a bat when I was in New York. I was able to catch it because my cats were starting to tear at its wings. I got at it a few times, but he was still doing fine, and I was able to put a hat over it. Then I got a little bit of a glove so I could hold him gently. And it was one of those ones with those really kind of strange faces, but it was almost so, quote-unquote, ugly that it was adorable. Huh. Okay, I'll walk off the path on that. I can't tie that in with anything. Because, again, I know the Chinese zodiac, and I'm not aware of a bat in their zodiac. I'm quite sure they have their own animal medicine for sure. But I didn't know that they had vampire bats in Asia. I thought the vampire bat was largely kind of an America's thing. Oh, I love bats. Totally love bats. I talk to them when I see them outside. I don't see them. I used to see them every night. And then we had the white nose disease has taken down the bats, and I think that's very much tied in with the aluminum and the other the degradation of the ecosystem. Alrighty, so I guess we're going to be winding the show down now. Geographically speaking, about what? White nose disease? Until I get an answer, I won't answer further. Zach, I don't have enough information to answer you with intelligence. I'm really not sure what you're on about here. I'm trying. Okay, I don't know what phrase of speech, so when you say in or on, I still don't know what we're talking about. I really don't know where we're going. I mean, I'm kind of seeing oops, 5 V power chevron, and then I see a question. Thank you, Oswald. But even questions that are not asked from a Sophianic perspective, I'll just answer from my Sophianic perspective. It's the perspective that that gives us our orientation, knowing where we are, who we are, where we are, things like that. No, okay, yeah, I'm on the same Earth. I'm on the same Earth with everybody else, but I'm on the Earth, but in the dreaming of the Earth. But of course, that dreaming is kind of like the dreaming space is kind of between the surface. We'll say for this instance, surface of the earth and the up, where the atmosphere becomes uninhabitable for a human being. I mean, many of us, especially in our more shamanic type of circles, where, again, when 4 and 5D are additions to 3D. You don't escape 3D, you add to 3D. To 3D, we add a 4D perspective. To 5D, we add 5D perspective. In many ways, the dimensions, and I don't know where I said this, so I hope I'm not repeating myself on my stream. Think of the dimensions as height. So think of if we're 3 feet tall. Let's say 3 feet tall represents being in the 3 dimensions. And there's a counter. We're in a kitchen. There's a counter, and that counter is 3 feet or higher. What's on that counter will not be seen by the 3 foot tall person, unless they stand on their tippy toes, which is kind of like almost like shamanic journeying, but you can't stay on your tippy toes. You have to go back down on your flat feet. And so in 3D, we have a perspective, and basically anything that's above 3 feet in placement, it's kind of out of our purview. We can see it, but we see it at angles. Once we grow to 4 feet, we have a good foot over that 3 foot counter. Now all the things from that perspective are now part of our perspective, but our feet are still on the floor. In other words, the 3 foot person has grown to 4 feet. The 3D person grows to 4D. They don't leave the other Ds, they add the 4th. Hello, RC. And then once you get to the 4th, you usually are going to go to the 5th pretty quickly, because the 4th is kind of like a holding space. The 4th isn't a very active dimension for us. For us, it's wisdom. There is a 4th dimension that is full of non-wisdom, but it's the wisdom of the quote-unquote wisdom of another system. So, there's, to me, a lot of the woo-woo around dimensional access and dimensional inhabiting dimensions often has people leaving where they were as opposed to growing. Once again, a 3 foot person doesn't lose their 3 feet to go to 4 and is only a foot tall now. They're now 4 feet tall. So similarly, a 3D person going into 4 and 5D is just getting taller. And so in many of the shamanic spaces, obviously we sit in our wisdom, because wisdom is a kind of a seating place. And then we dialogue, we discuss from the 5th dimension, ideas, what our will, what our intention is. And there is a fair amount of telepathic transmission that happens in the 5D space, where you throw a few words out to kind of, a few words kind of from the landscape, and then the other person picks up the landscape and they give you a few words back that kind of confirm we have a connection. The idea, the concept has been transmitted. So we used a few words to get there, but the rest of the transmission was picked up. So it's a kind of a form of telepathy. So to me, that's, that communicating at the lesser word and more telepathic level is very 5D behavior. So that's my little dimension rant. or demented rant. So everybody, I guess we're going to call it a night. I'm glad I managed to get the Goob song out, Go to Your Room. And I saw very pleasant feedback in real time from that. And those of you, if anybody here came in after I did the song, and I think it certainly happened after the first hour. I don't know. Here's a good question from Oswald, one that will jump on. He asked, do you think telepathy in relation to the dimensions is a forgotten ability or lost? I won't even get in, it's not even a matter so much of the dimensions, although again, non-access to those areas that we can just share. I'm going to blame it on the, and I see a causal relationship. I kind of like when I wanted to understand that what my download was, what my piece was. When the new religions showed up between 1,000 or a little bit longer years ago, and it wasn't that long ago, trust me. Feel me. Feel it yourself. When the world that existed beforehand, we were telepathic. First of all, we were kind of pulling from the same kind of wisdom about the earth. And don't forget, wisdom in Greek, if we're going to say Greek, would be Sophia or Sophia. So I'm using the word wisdom with multiple applications, including exactly what it means, wisdom. So prior to the onslaught, prior to the demiurgic warfare and punishment for believing things different than them happened. Okay, we used to be able to share all that. When that shared common space became dangerous because you didn't know which one of your fellow pagans decided to go over to the new side for whatever reason, that shared fifth dimensional telepathic space became very dangerous to people's health, because you could end up being burned at a stake or just, put to death one way or another for what was going on in your head. See, this is what typifies the Abrahamic systems. You can be put to death for what you think. So don't tell me about the love of these systems. Love is an inserted word. Any love that's in them came from humans, and it floats around in the milieu as a distraction. So really, the shutting down of telepathy was a matter of survival in a world that was, suddenly shocked by this violent onslaught of a belief system, a violent belief system. And some people were traumatized into going with the demiurgic side. And so everybody had to shut down. It was not safe to share thoughts with people anymore. And I believe telepathy, to me, 1,000 years ago, we're quite sure there was quite a bit of telepathy, or just a little bit longer. But when the systems based in Torah came along with prescriptions of death for believing or worshiping or revering that which you wish to revere, when that became punishable by death, things had to shut down. And shut down they did. And now we're recovering it, and we're recovering it in our own sacred spaces by sitting in a space that is ours, that is our sovereign space, engaging in our innate human species talents. And in that safe space, we are able to find that telepathic communication again. Little by little, you know, it's a skill that needs to be redeveloped, but it is developing quickly. So anyway, I often start to close this down at the 2-hour mark, and usually between 2:15 and 2:20. That's 2 hours and 20 minutes or 2 hours. It finally does, the stream does end. Well, hello, White Lunar World Bridger. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the perspective. That's what we do in our community is, you know, we kind of have these meetings and we share our perspectives. I spend a lot of time, you know, honing my perspective. Spending time with wisdom, so that I might develop my own. And just since you just caught the end of this, you might as well. There's a song somewhere around after the 1 hour mark that I did tonight, if you're interested in that. And the song is definitely ties in with the discussions that we've been having. So everybody, that'll be it for tonight. Thank you all for coming here. It was a relative. It was as far as people watching, it was a humble one tonight. I don't know if it's because it's a holiday weekend or my last show was like, I don't need to watch one of those again. And funny, I did the last show differently than most of these shows. The last show I kind of came on cold, hadn't done any meditation and the energy preparation I normally do for these shows, but tonight I did. So that'll be it. I'm going to turn off the streaming here. Stop